Good afternoon, everybody. Just make sure that you're aware that this is being recorded and will be shared publicly. So good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to be hosting the third webinar of the year from the Humber and North Yorkshire Leap Placement webinar series. During our webinar today, Laura and guests will provide you with the context and background to the role emerging placements in dietetics. There were two pilots undertaken by dietetics students from the University of Hull, representing a new and innovative way of delivering practice-based learning. We will be highlighting why this is important to our wider system at Humber and North Yorkshire Integrated Care Partnership, the ICP. We hope to offer an overview of the setup process, pre-placement preparation, supervision arrangements, learning outcomes, and post-placement reflections too. And of course, leave you with some contact details to support any future initiatives you might consider and you might think we might be able to support you with. There'll be some time at the end of our webinar to take any questions you're posting in chat. And if we run out of time, we'll collate in all these questions and make sure they are answered and posted to you in our post-webinar communications, which will be about 2 weeks from today. Next slide, please, Hannah. My name's George Zerner. I'm one of the lead project managers working towards the Grow Our Workforce strategic priority hosted within the People Directorate of Humber and North Yorkshire Integrated Care Partnership. Delighted to introduce you today to my colleagues, Laura Cowley, who is a practice education facilitator and registered dietitian from the University of Hull, Cicely Olsbury, Partnership Director of St Mary's College Medical Health and Social Care Academy, Kath Durans, Deputy Head of Therapies and Head of Dietetics at Hull University Teaching NHS Trust, and they will be joined by students Fiona, Rachel and Christy. Contact details are included later on in the slide deck should you wish to get in touch, including hyperlinks to our Twitter and future NHS platform. Please do tweet us with the hashtag REP, and the Twitter account is on the bottom corner of the slides, and share any information about anything that stands out for you today. We would love to hear from you. Next slide, please. Before I provide you with a brief overview of the LEAP programme, I thought it'd be helpful to clarify the role of the integrated care systems and why this particular project is of strategic importance to us. Apologies to those who are attending who are already familiar with the integrated care systems, also referred to as the ICSs. Our health and care systems are partnerships of organisations that come together to plan and deliver joined up health and care services and work together to improve the lives of people who live and work in their area. Humber and North Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership are one of 42 statutory health and care systems now established across England. We are one of 4 ICSs within the North Eastern Yorkshire region, and we have 6 places within our geographical footprint. The Humber and North Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership have recently refreshed their integrated and care strategy. And this slide outlines our ongoing ambition to improve the lives of our residents and to increase their life expectancy. It is underpinned by the Health Foundation building blocks of good health. Our vision is for all people to start well, live well, age well and die well. We have a set of intentions to achieve this vision with focus on creating the right conditions within our ICS that will change, empower and enable our residents to think person, enabling people to live healthy, independent and safe lives for as long as possible, understanding what matters to them rather than what is the matter with them. Think family, supporting families to enable everyone to be safe, grow and learn, and that every child has the best start in life. And think community by being all inclusive through a community approach that ensure the next generation are healthier than the last and have the opportunity to thrive. Next slide, please. So LEAP stands for Learning Environments, Assessment and Placements. It is a time-limited NHS programme established within Humber and North Yorkshire since 2020. Health education's main aim originally was to increase practice-based learning opportunities for the pre-registration learners in order to meet our national workforce ambitions. Despite this, our primary stakeholder group agreed at the start of the programme that an increase in practice-based learning opportunities would likely be an incidental output of our projects. This is because placement expansion is more complex than just opening up new learning spaces. This allowed us to adapt our strategy, and our ambition has always been to fund and develop interventions for any learner and to also make sure that our existing workforce were included within the definition of a learner. We have a LEAP strategy and delivery plan. We are supporting the delivery of these 3 strategic priorities and 5 objectives outlined on this slide. Our priorities are all based on the call to action within the NHS People Plan to grow our workforce, train our people and work together differently. The LEAP programme is effectively an enabler, providing funding for proof of concept pilots that can be sustained and reproduced at scale beyond the life of LEAP. You can find out more about the programme by following the links to our web pages and our Future NHS platform. So for now, however, I am delighted to hand over to Laura to share information about their role emerging placements in dietetics.
Fantastic. Thank you, George. And thank you everyone for joining. So today myself and some colleagues are going to be talking to you about how we undertook 2 pilots for role emerging placements in our dietetics course that happened earlier this year in May. Next slide, please. So our running order for today is that you're going to hear a bit from me first to give the Higher Education Institute perspective, why we decided to do this, how we went about setting it up, some of the key stakeholders involved. I'm then going to hand you over to Cicely to give you that perspective from the placement provider, and then we also have 3 of our students who are going to give their perspective on how they actually found the placement, and then finally we have Kath Durrans, who's going to give that perspective of being a long arm supervisor to the students whilst they were on the role emerging placement, and then there will be some time at the end for questions as well. Next slide, please. So just to give some context, in case there might be some people on the call who are not familiar with this terminology, role emerging placements are essentially placements that occur at a site where there is not an established therapy role. Occupational therapists have been doing this for many years, so it's not necessarily a new way of doing placements, and that's why this most frequently used definition comes from their College of OTs. It is, I would say, pretty new to dietetics though, and it differs significantly from the traditional model of placements that we're used to running, where the student is having their placement take place in a setting where the role of a dietitian is already well established, and that's typically in hospitals or community healthcare services, NHS organisations usually. Next slide, please. So why did we want to do this then? There's quite a number of reasons. The main one is that there are increasing numbers of students that need training. Dietetics is a growing profession. I think year on year the HCPC register is increasing significantly, which is a wonderful thing because we all know in dietetics that we're a small profession and we need more of us. But nonetheless, that means that there's more students being trained. There's now more universities offering dietetics as a course. And the backdrop to that is the NHS is currently dealing with difficulty recruiting and under quite a lot of pressure at the moment. So the capacity for training students in those traditional placement models is reduced. So looking at alternative models like role emerging placements, it gives us another way of training healthcare professional students. One of the benefits of role emerging placements that we felt when we started looking at this was that it would give our students an opportunity to develop those leadership skills right from the beginning of their placement, right from the beginning of their learning journey. Sometimes in the traditional model of placements, it can feel, I think as a student, it can sometimes feel a little bit like you're having your hand held a lot. There sometimes isn't much scope for flexibility. Usually students are given a timetable and it's kind of quite set in terms of what activities they are expected to be involved in. Whereas when they're going into an environment where there isn't a dietitian role in that environment, it means that they have to use their creativity, they have to use their ingenuity and develop those leadership skills to be able to actually establish a role in that environment. And I think we can all agree that leadership skills are so important in the sort of ever-changing healthcare. Thank you for the thumbs up. The ever-changing healthcare setting, we need students who are going to have those leadership skills. Increasingly as well, we do sometimes get students that maybe don't necessarily want to go into clinical practice. They want to be a dietitian, but they don't necessarily want to work in a hospital, and that's okay as well. And I think it's important that we provide those students with alternative placement experiences. And I think it's something that maybe attracts students to wanting to study with us, because we are looking at these different models and students are interested in that. We're very much hoping that role emerging placements may potentially increase employment opportunities after graduation. Some of these organisations that don't currently employ dietitians, by having students going in and spending their placements there, it might open their eyes to what dietitian can do. They may be interested in potentially contracting dietitians to do certain work for them, or maybe even creating roles for dietitians within their organisations. Also, all of this is on the backdrop of an increasing national focus on the importance of population health and the importance of looking at health from a systems approach. And that's why we've seen over the last few years the creation of integrated care systems, which are not only looking at NHS organisations' role in healthcare, but also the role of other local organisations, charities as well, in terms of how they all contribute to people's health. And I think we need to be training our students to align with these models and these new national drivers for population health. And finally, from a HEI perspective, we also see it as our responsibility, and something that we want to do as well is to collaborate with our local organisations. We really want to be of service to our local area. So making those links with different organisations is really important to us. Next slide, please. So just briefly then, some of the preparation steps that we took from the HEI perspective. I've numbered these, however, I will say that they didn't necessarily happen in this order. There was a lot of overlap, a lot of toing and froing, and it happened over a long period of time, over a year. So it was something that was quite fluid and changeable. Role emerging placements was very new to us as a program team, so we were very much sort of feeling this out as we went along. It started, of course, with some initial discussions with the placement providers, and I think one of the great benefits of what's happening in our region is that Hanan and George have a role emerging placements meeting that happens on a regular basis, and that sort of allows us as a HEI to get in contact with local organisations who may be interested in having healthcare students on this style of placement. So that was a really good sort of framework to get access to in order to meet people that would be interested in doing this. And then over that long period of time, we met with the placement providers on a regular basis. We did some site visits and discussed all of the practicalities, really, of how this might work in practice. So things like timings, when were we going to do it, what dates would work mutually for our programme and the placement providers. Of course, our students also have set competencies that they have to meet on their placement, and we are very much having to be aligned to the HCPC to make sure that quality of training is there. Anyone who works in dietetic student training will tell you there's quite a lot of paperwork to get your head around for both the providers and the students. So that was a lot of discussions to make sure that everyone was going to be okay with that and it was going to work. We also discussed the supervision needs of the students whilst they would be on placement. And in addition to that, making sure that the placement providers knew the limitations of the students' scope of practice whilst they were on placement was a really, really important thing, because they weren't going to have that direct supervision from a dietitian. And then, of course, we also worked with the placement providers to think about what sort of projects they were interested in having the students undertake, what was going to be beneficial for them. We went out for expressions of interest to the students, because it was important for us to get students who actually were interested in doing this type of placement, so that we could get the best possible outcome. We also went out to a couple of our local NHS trusts to speak to the dietitian departments to get people who would be interested in doing the long arm supervision. Next slide, please. Another very important quality requirement was that we completed the audit with our 2 new providers, and this is the same audit process that we do with our other NHS placement providers. So that involved a bit of setup, getting them set up on the appropriate IT systems. We use PAIR, which I believe is used quite frequently throughout this region for other healthcare professional courses as well. A really important step was to introduce the placement provider and the long arm supervisor. I would say what's really key in these sort of placements is having very good communication between all the different parties involved. So between ourselves at the HEI, the students, the placement provider and the long arm supervisor, there needs to be really good channels of communication so we can keep on track if there's any difficulties presenting. At the university, we also had to have some internal discussions with our placement management team. We had some existing software that was used to do allocations, and we had to make sure that the new providers were set up with that. Part of that also involved how we were going to divide the HEE training tariff between the organisations. So what we decided in the end was for every week of training, 4 days of the money would go to the placement provider and 1 day would go to the organisation that was employing the long arm supervising dietitians. So there was that sort of 4-to-1 split. And then the students would have had preparation sessions before going on placement, but we made sure that we incorporated some the different aspects of role emerging into those preparation sessions and made sure that the students had opportunity to ask plenty of questions to make sure they were comfortable with going on this slightly different placement model. Next slide, please. And I think there's an animation in there as well, George, if you click next. Thank you. So our placement model on our master's course, so we're a 2-year master's course at Hull, is very kind of set in terms of how it's been set up. So we had to really decide what was going to be the best place to do this sort of pilot, and we felt we would make it easy to begin with, as it's the first time that we've done this sort of placement. And so the first placement that our students do in their first year is a 3-week A placement. And the competencies that are looked at on this placement are professionalism and communication, which are not unique to dietetics. So it felt like that would be a very kind of easy place to start. Next slide, please. And finally, these are just to introduce you to the 2 organisations that we worked with. So we had Paul for Brain Recovery, which is a charity in Hull that works with people who have acquired brain injury, and Fiona, one of our students, did her 3-week placement with them. Then we had Rachel and Christy, our 2 students who went on placement to St Mary's College, which is a secondary school in Hull. And now I'm going to hand you over to Cicely from St Mary's College. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you to the LEAP for hosting us today. George, please, can I have next slide? So as Laura introduced, I am from St Mary's College and we are part of the St Cuthbert's Trust. St Mary's College is a secondary school in Hull that also has a 6th form. Next slide, please. And for those of you who haven't met me, my name's Cicely Alsbury, and I am the Partnership Director for our Medical Health and Social Care Academy that runs at the college. My email address is also located on the slide and will be presented later as well. So should you have any questions about anything I have to say today, please feel free to get in touch. Next slide, please. So contextually, we have a very unique relationship here at St. Mary's, whereby we created a medical health and social care academy in 2015 based on a partnership that we had with the Hull Clinical Commissioning Group. As such, this partnership grew and ensured that we were in partnership with all of our local NHS organisations, as well as our higher education institutions that are local to us, including Hull University. Now, as a result of this, we created an enrichment program for our students that allowed them to be able to get things like additional training, mentorship, and work experience to their chosen fields or career aspirations that we can help them to be able to pursue. We saw a 50% increase in applications to higher education in health and social care careers in the first year. And as of present, we have over 50% of our first professionally graduated class now working still in Hull with our local NHS partners, as well as other third sector organisations. So the Medical Health and Social Care Academy is there really to be able to drive the future workforce and to give them the best opportunities possible to achieve success. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So as a result of this and as a result of our partnership, we've been working closely with the LEAP on different projects, and we were invited to be able to join the Role Emerging Placement Board in order to be able to review what opportunities we might be able to support with more locally and to help grow our existing partnerships. It was through this that we were able to get in contact with Laura and the other participants for Hull University, and we were able to host 2 dietetic students in this particular pilot project. This meant that we were able to give them opportunities to help practice their communication skills across the college, both with the other teachers and professionals working here, but also with the students themselves. This allowed them an opportunity to practice skills in their professional areas, which includes everything from taking part in safeguarding training to following all of those professional codes of conduct that are required in policies and procedures, like in the instance of a fire alarm. This meant that the students were given opportunities to be able to adapt and practice their communication skills effectively, how to be able to change them to meet different needs of service users or different needs of the students that they encountered across all of the age ranges that are here at the college. And this goes from year 7 right up to those graduating our 6th form now. This meant that the students were able to gain opportunities not only in participating in lessons, but finding out more through our special educational needs team, as well as the additional clubs and workshops that we have on offer throughout the college. And one of the brilliant things about this project is that we were able to give the students the capacity for them to be able to start to develop their leadership skills, as Laura highlighted. And in doing so, they used their own initiative to be able to create their own mini projects while they were here to fulfill their placement duties, which we were really pleased about. And I'm sure they will tell you more in terms of that. Now, as a result of the success of this model, we are more than happy to be able to host future dietetic students as well. And hopefully this can continue to help support those role emerging placements as that direct partnership. Now, for those of you that might not have hosted these things, there was some logistical things that obviously had to take place in order for us to be able to allow these opportunities for these students. Please, can I have the next slide? This meant that we did have to be able to work really closely, obviously, with the university and the Long Arm supervisor for any queries that may arise throughout, or how we can best support the students throughout their placement to make sure that they're as successful as possible. This meant that we also created a timetable to be able to help support with the different activities and different experiences throughout the college, so that the students were given that large breadth of information and breadth of opportunity to not only practice communication, but demonstrate those professionalisms. As such, this meant that we worked really closely with the dietetic students that we had as well. So this included lots of regular little meetings, lots of email communication as well, and allowing them and fostering those opportunities to have them explore their own professional development and their own communication skills in those various environments. And we couldn't have been happier with the students that we supported. So thank you both for joining us today. Next slide, please. If you did have any questions then just about the Medical Health and Social Care Academy, please feel free to get in touch. And I'd like to hand over now to, I believe, Fiona, who's going to tell us a little bit more about her experiences.
Thank you, Cicely. My name's Fiona, and just a little background about me. So in 2018, I graduated from Leeds Trinity University with a BSc in Sport and Exercise Science. I then went on to study a postgrad in sport nutrition at Leeds Beckett University, during which I discovered that my passions may be more aligned with nutrition in a clinical setting and working with the general public to help improve their overall health and well-being, which is what led me to my Masters in Nutrition and Dietetics today at Hull University. Next slide, please. So here's just a brief overview of my A placement. So I was predominantly based at Portland Brain Recovery, and as Laura already said, they work to support individuals going through recovery from acquired brain injuries, and they also offer support to families and carers as well. I was based at Paul Monday to Thursday, so 4 days a week, and because on Fridays I also had that clinical experience at Hull, shadowing on neurology, ICU, and the complex rehab unit at Castle Hill. And this complemented my placement with Paul really nicely, as it gave me a greater insight into the early stages of acquired brain injury and massively enhanced my knowledge base and understanding of the journey that the service users at Paul have been through. And for the entirety of my placement, the main aims were to build on competencies of communication and professionalism. And this was monitored by an on-site supervisor through daily meetings, and also from long-arm supervision from a registered dietitian, Catherine, who you'll be hearing from later on, from which I had weekly review meetings to ensure I was on track with meeting those competencies. And next slide, please. So whilst at Paul, my main task was to update the charity's current nutrition and recipe guide. I also got to spend time with service users, learning about their experiences with acquired brain injury and their journey through recovery, and how that has changed their relationship with food and their abilities to cook, and also their dietary needs. And this facilitated some really open and honest conversations about how that relationship with food has changed for the individuals, which enabled me to be able to create a recipe guide that was very inclusive to the service user needs. And I did manage to create 10 brand new recipes to include in the guide, which got very positive responses from the service users at Paul. Next slide, please. So whilst at Hull University teaching hospitals, I was fortunate enough to be able to shadow Band 5 and 6 dietitians on the neurology wards and in ICU, which was very eye-opening and overwhelming experience initially. But it was very interesting, and I really did learn a lot about the scope of dietetics in critical care. I was also fortunate enough to be able to shadow speech and language therapy on neurology, and I got to observe a dysphagia assessment. And whilst on the complex rehab unit, I got to observe a nutrition nurse providing training to a patient on best practice for administering their enteral feed. So as you can tell, I had a very well-rounded and varied experience, both in a clinical setting and also community-based, which I felt very fortunate about. Next slide, please. And so finally, just some post-placement reflections. So it was a fantastic opportunity to develop my knowledge base in an unfamiliar area, through developed understanding of how different acquired brain injuries can affect people's lifestyles and affect their relationship with food. It also facilitated my learning and development of how to ensure dietetic services are person-centered, which will be fundamental in my future career as a qualified dietitian. I also found this placement really exciting because it gave me the freedom and scope to be able to use my own initiative and creativity to complete the nutrition and recipe guide. And I also found that the long arm supervision worked very well, because having that dietetic input really ensured that my work was always accurate and evidence-based, which is very important. And as I already said, having that clinical experience really enhanced my experience at Paul for Brain Recovery. And overall, it was a fantastic opportunity, and I would definitely recommend role emerging placements to students in the future. Next slide, please. So now I will hand over to one of my other students, Rachel. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. So my name is Rachel. I'm originally from Galway, Ireland. I completed my undergraduate degree at the University College Cork, where I studied nutritional science. So for me, the attraction to dietetics was its focus on helping and working with other people. So I love educating and supporting others to really work on how to include food in a healthy, balanced life. So next slide, please.
Thank you, Rachel. So I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Christy. I graduated from the University of Brighton last summer with a degree in exercise and health science, and becoming a dietitian has been something I've always wanted to do from an early age. And I'm really excited to kickstart my career in dietetics and help others with their nutrition. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the placement Rachel and I were at. So we're based at St Mary's College, and as previously mentioned by Cicely, this is a secondary school and sixth form within the whole area. And we had 2 learning competencies that we had to attain. So this was to develop our communication skills as well as develop our professionalism skills. Our normal working day may be slightly different to the dietetic working day because it had to revolve around the school day. So we started about 8:15 to 8:30, and we finished about 3:30 to 4:45. And we regularly had guidance from Cicely, our on-site supervisor, as well as long-arm supervision from Jo Devon from the City Healthcare Partnership within Hull, and we met up with her once a week online. Next slide, please. So what we actually got up to on week 1. So as previously mentioned, we had this safeguarding training on our first day, and this really helped us get our professionalism skills ready for the rest of placement, and it would also be really transferable going on to clinical placements. We also got to shadow a variety of teachers and teaching assistants within the special educational needs and disability team. And we didn't only get to observe their outstanding professionalism and communication with both students and each other, we also got to develop our own skills of communication by supporting students one-on-one with students that might have different abilities or different backgrounds, and we had to adapt our communication skills to fit this. Next slide, please. And then progressing on from week 1 and into week 2 of our placement, we had a bit more sort of leeway to use our own initiative. And as you can see on the right-hand photo, Rachel and I actually carried out a series of presentations to a variety of different students. Next slide, please. So following on from that, these presentations were for a variety of different age groups, and it really developed those communication skills because it sort of made us speak to classes of up to 30 children at a time. So we really had to build our confidence that way, and we did multiple of these. So we found this really useful to hit that competency of communication. Next slide, please. And then going on to week 3, we had more scope to use our initiative, and we created an Eat Well guide poster for the canteen. So this incorporated a variety of the different Eat Well guides. So we got to use that nutritional knowledge that we had gained through our studies and put it into practice. And we sort of came up and created our own meals that would best fit with different Eat Well guides, such as the Afro-Caribbean Eat Well guide, South Asian, vegetarian, and the traditional Eat Well guide. And then on the right here, you can see a sixth form poster we created that was put up in the sixth form areas. And this was to give a snapshot into healthy eating for those that were a bit older. Next slide, please. And then following on at the end of sort of week 3, we had opportunity to do a pop-up stall for the sixth formers as well. And this was really useful for our communication skills for the older students. And I'll pass you on to Rachel, who will talk more about this. Next slide, please.
So as you can see here, this is just a picture of our pop-up stand. The aim of this was to educate students on the different sugar contents of various different foods and drinks that you'd often find in the teenager's diet. So this was a really good opportunity to work on them more informal communication skills while also enhancing our own confidence about speaking about the dietetic profession. So many of the students was asking us about what a dietitian is, how you'd get involved in this career, and what the job opportunities are like as well. And to engage students and kind of bring them over to the stand as well, we ran a small competition so that they could assess their own hand grip strength, and that worked really well as well. Next slide, please. So just going back to the presentations again for a couple of moments, as future healthcare professionals, we're very aware of the importance of adjusting our resources and our materials that we make and how important it is that they meet the needs of our service users. So in this case, that's making sure that our presentations were educational and were appropriate for the students. So we wanted to gain some feedback from students, and we did this through Mentimeter. So anyone who's not aware, Mentimeter is an online platform where you can log on and it's unlinked to your computer or wherever you're putting in your information, and then you can get back that feedback. So it was great for students who may not be as comfortable to tell us to our face whether or not they did enjoy it. So as you can see there, we got some really lovely feedback, but we also did receive some criticism, which we took on board and we were very happy to get. So some of the students mentioned that maybe we spoke too fast or the presentation was ran through too fast, and maybe it was ever so slightly too boring. So to adjust for this, we ensured that going on to our next set of presentations, we slowed down how we spoke. We both have quite different accents from the area as well, so it may be harder for students to understand what we're saying. And we also try to interact with the students a bit more, so hopefully keep them more engaged. So next slide, please. So then this was our final piece of feedback from the students. And after we had adjusted from their previous criticisms, it seemed like they had enjoyed the presentations more. We wanted to include this in the presentation as it's not often on your A placement that you get so much engagement with service users and you get to work on adjusting your own resources and materials and how you can take on criticism and then use that to improve your own work. So we thought that was a really good point. Next slide, please. So just looking back at the whole 3 weeks of placement, we really do feel like role emerging placements are excellent opportunities. We really did feel we had no problem meeting the communication and the professionalism skills, but also we feel we really explored our leadership ability as well. As Cicely and Christy had mentioned, we really got to walk in there and decide ourselves how we were going to meet the skills we needed to do, and Cicely helped us do that with no issue at all. As mentioned, we worked with teachers, teacher assistants, and students, so we got to use our communication skills with various different age groups. As I previously mentioned, Christy and I aren't actually from the area, so by working in the school, we began to understand how diverse and how many different cultures are in Hull, which is really important to understand when we're moving into our B and C placement, so we can adjust our communication skills for this population and understand that many people here might not have English as a first language, so it's important to know that when communicating with them. And finally, as we mentioned, we had 2 different supervisors, which was also really important for these role emerging placements. As your on-site supervisors ensures that what you're doing is suitable for where you are, but you're also making sure that you're still developing them dietetic skills. So next slide, please. And just looking to the future where students can come back and learn from role emerging placements again, we're thinking number 1, students could do great work with the catering team within the school. We're thinking you could look at assessing the knowledge of the current catering team, providing educational sessions if needed, as well as just working on recipe development. We feel like the verbal and non-verbal communication projects we worked on, such as the pop-up stand as well as the posters, will continue to be great opportunities. And finally, similar to what Fiona did with hers, we do believe that this placement will work quite well in a clinical placement as well. We're thinking you could do 3 to 4 days in the school and then 1 or 2 days in a hospital type of setting, maybe potentially in a paediatric ward. We think this would work quite well as you could work on that professionalism and the communication in the non-clinical role. And then in your last couple of days of the week, work on how you can transfer and consolidate them in the more clinical aspect of the way. So that is our roundup of the placement, and I will pass you on to Kath now.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Catherine Durrans. I'm a professional lead dietitian here at Hull University, teaching hospitals, and I help support Fiona with long arm supervision during her time with Paul for brain recovery. So I just wanted to give you my perspective from a long arm supervision point of view. I realised we weren't fully role emerging in that Fiona was with us for 1 day doing clinical things. So typical A placement type activity. Maybe skews it a little bit, but what did I do? So I'm the professional link, if you like. So my role was to ensure that from training point of view, from a competency point of view, the evidence that Fiona was collecting was meeting what she needed for her to be able to complete her A placement successfully. So my role was to meet with her as often as required. So we did plan once a week, but if Fiona needed any contact throughout the week for any sort of profession specific or clinical specific questions that her on-site supervisor couldn't support with, I was just there as a point of call. So I was ensuring that evidence collected met the competency, so it met the standard required to say that she had demonstrated her abilities in both communication and professionalism. And we spent time weekly review looking back at what she'd done in the week. Fiona kept a really comprehensive reflective diary. She had a placement A workbook to work through. So what had she achieved? What might have been a challenge? What did she think her strengths were? Was there ways that we could look at providing different opportunities, make sure she was supported in making sure there was enough opportunities for her to do what she needed to do, collect her evidence. Because the way their service runs, they had a little bit of difficulty filling a timetable for a Friday. We saw that as an opportunity just to welcome Fiona here on site to be able to see that full patient journey and start being in the healthcare environment. So she was able to see right from a major trauma, acquiring a brain injury, critical care, step down onto neurology ward, step down into complex rehab, step into the community supported by different organisations. So she was able to see the whole patient pathway and different individuals, healthcare professionals that might be involved in that. It wasn't an obligation as a long arm supervisor. So just to get across, it wasn't something that I had to do, but it was just an opportunity. It seemed a no-brainer just to take that. So if you can offer something like that, if it's requested, I think it complemented it quite well. What did I find challenging? I think my biggest challenge was managing expectations. So, and you might find this with other role emerging placements, what is required, the project that the charity were wanting Fiona to complete versus from a professional point of view where we can help. So just for an example, if you're trying to give advice around brain recovery, everybody knows how to Google something, don't they? And, turmeric looks like it helps people with a brain injury. Should we have lots of recipes with turmeric in them? Well, actually, let's look at this from professionally. What's the evidence base for that? Is there enough research to suggest that this is an effective treatment? Should this be something we're encouraging service users to do? So for me, it's trying to negotiate the expectations, what they were wanting, but actually what it is that as a dietitian I'd be happy for myself to do or anybody else. So I think that was the biggest challenge, ensuring that we were providing evidence-based clinical point of view. Also managing expectations, so what Fiona's expectations for the week, what my expectations were for the week, what Lee, the on-site supervisor, what his expectations were for the week, what can be realistically achieved, what did my role need to be. So at the end of the day, it all came down to communication. We're all very open to having conversations about, well, actually, I think this might work. I don't think that might be appropriate, and trying to explain each other's points of view. And it was all very agreeable. So my tips for other long arm supervisors, if you're supporting a role emerging placement, is to do the preparatory work, get to know the placement provider. What is it they're wanting to achieve? How can you facilitate that? Keep those channels of communication open. I was really well supported as well by Laura as the PLF from the university. Laura was the one that coordinated getting us all in contact with each other. So, all the groundwork was done by her, and me and Lee just sort of followed suit. We exchanged contact details, so me and Lee could communicate between ourselves. Like I say, Fiona was able to contact me at any point during the week, which we freely did. We were talking on email throughout the week. She sent me, well, I found this study, what do you think? And I'm like, oh, you tell me about this, or what did you think about that? Which worked really well. Would I do it again? Yes, I definitely would. I think there's benefits to being a long arm supervisor. Not only is it supporting student training, developing the workforce, looking at different ways of working with different organisations, but my own personal development, I found this really interesting. I've expanded my network. I've got a better link now with Paul for brain recovery. From an organisation point of view, can we now work better as two different organisations? How can Huth now support Paul for brain recovery a little bit better? Now we know each other and what each other do. And I think it definitely demonstrates what a dietitian can do out with the normal day-to-day clinical practice. The benefits and skills of dietitians outside of healthcare services are endless, really. So yeah, I would strongly encourage anybody who gets offered this opportunity to support to take it up. I haven't seen any disadvantage. It was all positive. Next slide, please. And I shall hand over back to George, I think.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, ladies. That's fantastic. Some great innovative placements, which would only have happened with your openness to try this pilot. It was also great to hear a variety of accents, which was always nice. And as we near the end, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Laura, Cicely, Kath, Fiona, Rachel and Christy for sharing your journey and experience in role emerging placement in dietetics, highlighting the positive impact of such a project. And it's great to hear from a variety of people within this project, so learners, HCIs, providers, clinical staff. We're really happy that you presented this to Humber and North Yorkshire. If this is something anybody has further interest in providing as a project, please do get in touch with the LEAP team. I've also put the Future NHS platform link into the chat. And probably also a good timing to introduce you to our, I'm not sure if we can still say new in post, placement coordinator, Claire Pemberton. Claire?
Hi, thanks, George. That was a brilliant presentation, everybody, especially the students. Well done. I know it's nerve-wracking talking to a group of people, even on Teams, so well done. That was amazing. So yeah, not really that new in post anymore, but I am the placement coordinator working with the LEAP team, and my role is to open up new placement opportunities for our health and social care students within Humber and North Yorkshire, utilising non-traditional pathways. So the rep model is a prime example of a model that we want to try and run with, really, and use more. So we're trying to get more students into the charity and voluntary sector, primary care, and local authority care homes. So St Mary's having dietetic students in a school is really kind of groundbreaking. So using that kind of model, we really want to run with it, and hopefully we'll be able to open up loads of new placement opportunities for students in our area.
Thanks, Claire. Hanan, could you just move on to the final slide, please? Thank you. So please scan the QR code to complete the feedback form. We'd really appreciate any feedback on this webinar as we look to improve our work and LEAP enjoy getting feedback. I'll leave this up as we work through the Q&A. I'll now turn on microphones and cameras for any questions. I know a few questions have been in the chat and I believe have been answered, but if anybody has anything else, please do. Sorry, just 1 second. Joe should be working. So if there are any questions, please do fire them across. And there's also the link to the feedback form if that's easier. Rupert, I see you've got your hand up.
Hi, I work in Bradford, so I've come over from West Yorkshire. Just a quick question to Kirsty, Rachel, and Fiona. Doing a sort of novel approach for your A placement, how are you guys feeling about then doing a B placement, which might be in a more traditional kind of clinical setting?
I can take this one if the other two want. I think, you know, the main thing and what they say to us all the time is about not comparing placements and things like that. I do think we may not have had as much clinical experience as some people who may have been in that setting, but we're not expected to have more than that communication and professionalism, and we have some additional skills that others won't have from this role of merging placement. So I think everyone goes into B and C with some nerves anyways, but I think from the other skills that we do have coming in now, we will shine in other ways, but we might not have that clinical background. Yeah.
Thanks.
Just to leap in there, sorry, Fiona might be a little bit different because her first day with us, even though she was on a Royal Emerging Placement, the first day she came across to Huth for some weekly review with me. She was in critical care, so so she did get some of the taste of what it's like to be clinical, even if it was just like a half day a week. But I don't know how Fiona feels about that. But yeah, she was straight into critical care.
Yeah, no, I feel like I definitely learnt a lot from that. And from what Rachel said as well, I think we gained a lot of other skills to take into B and C placements. For example, like working on our own leadership skills and being independent and taking initiative for our own learning, which is very important. I think they'll be very important to have as we build on competency through B and C placements. So it's really nice to sort of get like a little insight on how we can start to do that as we progress through our studies as student dietitians.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions for anybody? Kate?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thank you. Lovely presentation and great hearing from the students. Yeah, just similar to what was just previously asked. I'm just wondering, because I always thought of the A placement as an opportunity as well to see the full role of a dietitian and make sure you're in the right career. And I think it's useful if they are combining it, say at least on one day a week, where they are getting some hospital or clinical experience. Would the students agree with that, or were they fully confident in going into the role of a dietitian in the future for the B and C?
I can speak on this one. Personally, I think having it all not clinically for placement A was completely fine, as we managed to gain those skills. Just to reiterate basically what Rachel and Fiona were saying, we got those skills and we actually did, I think we did get an understanding of the dietetic profession and if we wanted to do it, because we had to use the nutritional knowledge and put it into practice, like via the posters or via the pop-up stands, and even the presentations where we had to talk about the dietetic profession. Obviously, we didn't get that sort of clinical experience, but I think if this was to be done as maybe a role emerging placement for placement B or C, then it would be better to be combined with a clinical placement.
Thank you.
Thanks. We've also got a question in the chat for the students, whether the 2-to-1 model was preferable compared to the standard 1-to-1 supervision model.
Is that just in relation to us having the two supervisors, or is it that Fiona was by herself and Christy and I were together?
If you could answer both, that'd be great.
Okay. I think it was lovely, especially again for the role emerging, to have the two different supervisors anyways to begin with, because obviously Joe would understand the dietetic perspective, but we needed Cicely as well so that we could work well within the school. And obviously they both were bringing the two different viewpoints there that we needed. So definitely, I do think two supervisors is needed. And as Christy was saying as well, if it was the B and C, you'd need that as well for the clinical side of things. And I think Fiona can speak on this as well, but the three of us have often discussed the difference we've had on placements as Christy and I were together, whereas Fiona was by herself. And I think going forward, it definitely is nice to have someone else to bounce ideas off and things like that as well. It definitely made a difference, I think, and maybe Fiona can speak on that a bit more, but it was lovely for Christy and I definitely when we had that bit more independence, but we still had someone to bounce ideas off and double check things with, as it was, you know, our first time in that more professional experience. Yeah.
I think as well, like the way that we designed your opportunities was to allow you both to have separate experiences with different classes or different students or different SEND team members as well, which meant that when you did come back together, you were able to kind of share in the different experiences and to be able to let each other know what your challenges might have been in that last hour in the morning time sessions in order to be able to then kind of have that reflective practice almost built in because you had each other in order to be able to develop those skills even further. And when you did do the bigger presentations about the dietetic role to the students, again, because it was a shared presentation, you were able to kind of give each other that little sense of feedback and confidence in order to be able to develop those skills and adapt them based on some of that feedback that you said. So well done, ladies.
Definitely, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, just following on from that, I think for my placement, I think it would have been beneficial to have that peer support like Christy and Rachel had, just like you say, to get that peer feedback with it being a completely new type of placement and just be able to bounce ideas off each other. And like whilst I did learn like important skills of being independent and being accountable for my own learning and development, I think having that peer support would be very beneficial, especially in a placement when you're just getting started and with it being a new type of placement as well.
Thank you. I'm just wary of time. We've got 2 minutes left. Do we have any more questions? If any questions do come after, we will get them asked to the group and put them within the communications when we send out the presentation and the recording, which will be 2 weeks from today. And we don't look like we've got any more questions. So I'd just like to say thank you for your attendance. And again, thank you to the presenters. Hopefully you found this thought-provoking, and we hope to hear from you all soon and see you at some of our upcoming webinars very soon. Thank you, everyone.